Welcome back to another UCL Fantasy video and podcast, the final one of the season as I delve into my team selection for Matchday 13 in the Champions League final. We have 5 free transfers and I'll be discussing my transfer plans as well as how I did in Matchday 12 and my current setup without making any transfers. On screen you can see the league code to join the UCL Fantasy League. I have been making content for that fantasy format. The first draft is already out on the channel and there are a few more videos and podcasts headed your way, potentially a how to play guide, a chip strategy, and best players in each position, best budget players, team selections, limitless wildcards, you name it. If you have played UCL Fantasy, it will be quite similar, but it would be on the international stage. So be sure to tune in by subscribing to the channel, smashing the like button, and also checking out all the other links in the description below for my Twitter and Instagram, Dylan RCM, the Patreon, Championships Discord server, UCL Fantasy League as well, if you haven't joined it already. But without further ado, let's jump straight into it. For the second leg of the semi-finals, I scored 73 points and that resulted in another green arrow. After a disappointing start to the knockouts, I have been getting those green arrows slowly but steadily and I'm now up to 1.4k in the world, and the aim would be to enter the top 1k, which will be very difficult because most of us will have identical teams. It's about those 2 or 3 players potentially, perhaps even just the one that can make the difference and getting that 5th transfer spot on. As I'll show you later in this video and podcast, I will be making 4 transfers that are pretty much locked in, but the 5th one is definitely open to interpretation and it might depend a lot on the lineups we see during the deadline stream on Saturday, which will also be headed your way on FPL Dylan. But I've got 829 points overall, both goalkeepers blanked in Donnarumma and Lunin, and one of my regrets is not having Kobel throughout the entire Champions League season. He was great in the knockouts and of course in the group stages where he was in the group of death, but Kobel still managed to find a way to get some big returns and he has been the best goalkeeper in this fantasy format. I would argue Lunin has been the second best, but he won't start the Champions League final according to several reports. It will be Courtois between the sticks, despite the fact that the Belgian was left out of the Belgian squad for the Euros. But regardless, I will be prepared for either scenario, so I've got Lunin in place already if he were to start, but it's very unlikely that that will be the case. And it's also between Kobel and Courtois for my goalkeeper transfer. It's looking very likely that I'll have to make one to have a starting goalkeeper for the Champions League final. And whilst Kobel has been tremendous this season and Courtois hasn't featured in the Champions League, I'd rather go for Courtois, as delved into in the best wildcard and limitless team video and podcast, which I rolled into one specific video. And in terms of my defenders, Mats Hummels was the star of the show with 16 points. He scored the winner against Paris Saint-Germain and delivered 16 points despite being booked. He has been tremendous this season in the Champions League and his ball recoveries are just insane. That's the main reason why he has been so good, but he's got that odd goal in him from here and there and also some clean sheets despite having such a tough group and also facing some top teams in the knockout stages. And it wouldn't surprise me if he were to get to 100 points because he's on 91 at the moment. Now, you would argue that Real Madrid are very likely to score, and they probably will. Then you're relying on attacking contributions on top of ball recoveries for Hummels to reach that milestone. But he is still the highest scoring player in UCL Fantasy this season, and it's impossible for the likes of Bellingham, who is second with 65 points, to usurp him in top spots. So Hummels has been tremendous, the best UCL Fantasy asset this season, and hopefully he can play in the Champions League next season as well. Maatsen delivered 7 points. Then you've got Rudiger, who I bought in, and it was between him and Carvajal, and luckily I went for Rudiger, who got an assist against Bayern Munich, and Bayern Munich took the lead, of course. Real Madrid scored 2 late goals and ended up going through. It seems inevitable in the Champions League, so I'm happy I bought in Rudiger. He hasn't been a great UCL Fantasy option this season. I think his best performances and points production was back in his Chelsea days when they won the Champions League back in 2021. Then we've got Marquinhos with 5 points, and actually I've been selling and buying him for the last couple of weeks now. It's a bit crazy, but he delivered 5 points because of ball recoveries, and Marquinhos is a good use of fantasy option, but unfortunately he is already out of the competition. Then we've got Julian Brandt, who delivered 7 points, and I talked about this in my team selections, limitless and wildcard videos and podcasts heading into Matchday 12. Julian Brandt didn't start a single away game in the Champions League this season until Matchday 12. I waited for the lineups during the deadline stream, I kept Brandt and he delivered 7 points. So I'm very happy with his performance. Sabitzer has been very disappointing since I bought him in. I think the week before I bought him in, he had 14 points. And after that, he's just been blanking time after time. And he missed so many big chances back in matchday 11 for the home tie against Paris Saint-Germain. Leroy Sané did very well in the home tie against Real Madrid, but away from home, he was quite ineffective. I think all the Bayern Munich attackers were very underwhelming and they were quite blunt in the attack and they lacked that potency up front to kill off the game, which you need to do against Real Madrid. Then there's one of the favourites for the Ballon d'Or in Jude Bellingham. He is currently second in the Ballon d'Or rankings, but a great performance in the Champions League final could change things. He was recently awarded the best player in La Liga, but he has been so anonymous in the Champions League knockout stages. Only one return, which came against Leipzig back in matchday 7. Ever since, it's been blank after blank, but I've got a great feeling about him in the Champions League final against his former club. I think he will score in this game. That's my prediction. Let's see if it comes to fruition, but there's always this kind of extra motivation for a player when they play their former club, and to do that in a Champions League final in your debut season for Real Madrid, it will be quite special for him, and at Wembley as well as an Englishman. But I still think this midfield was quite good overall, and it was mainly those two Borussia Dortmund midfielders. Up front, Harry Kane got an assist for that amazing goal that Alphonso Davies scored to put Bayern Munich ahead, and Vinicius Jr. got the Player of the Match award yet again, and I captained him in matchday 11 and 12, and he's been a great UCL Fantasy option in the knockouts. He always steps up in the big games for Real Madrid, and that's why he's currently the leading contender for the Ballon d'Or. But that could certainly change. He isn't particularly great in the Copa America stage and for Brazil, but maybe this will be the time and the year for him to rectify things and to do really well on the international stage as well. Everyone on my bench was from PSG and they all blanked, so I probably went a bit too heavy on PSG. Looking back on it, I should have gone for Kobel over Donnarumma, but looking back on it, I don't have too many regrets because PSG were at home. I thought PSG would win the game even if they were to be knocked out on penalties or something like that. But Kobel, that's one of my biggest regrets of the season, I think, just not having him at any stage of the competition. I might rectify that going into matchday 13, but before I talk about my transfer plans, let me show you how my squad looks like without making any moves going into the Champions League final. It doesn't look great. I've got Loon in there, but he's probably not going to start. As discussed earlier, I've got Antonio Rudiger, Maatsen and Hummels, so 3 decent defenders, arguably 3 of the best you can buy. Then I've got Bellingham, Sabitzer and Brandt with Vinicius up front, but of course there are some holes really, and I need to fill up that starting 11. Now a lot of you might be a bit worried and you want to fill in your entire 50-man squad. That's not too important in the Champions League final. I always say this because you can't make manual substitutions for the Champions League final. That really applies for a semi-final or any other stages from matchday 1 to 12, where you've got different days within a match day and you can make some changes accordingly in terms of captaincy, and also on your bench you take off players who play on the first day who don't score many points and you bring on players who are yet to play. That's not going to be the case this time round for the Champions League final, so all you need is 11 players, and with 5 free transfers the vast majority of us should be able to do that unless you did something horribly wrong and loaded up on PSG and Bayern Munich players with none from Real Madrid or Borussia Dortmund. And there's always this question about striking that balance. How many players do you go for in terms of each team for a Champions League final? And the limit is 8 players from a single club at this stage of the competition. And I have gotten it right on a few occasions, like last season I loaded up on Man City against Inter Milan, and also a few years ago Bayern Munich versus Paris Saint-Germain. But other times I got it completely wrong. For example, I went for a lot of Liverpool and Real Madrid players at the same time, and it's kind of awkward with Real Madrid because they don't have many great UCL Fantasy options, and they never really have, but they're such a collective team and they find a way of winning games. They might have a few standouts like Vinicius, Bellingham, and perhaps 1 or 2 more like Rodrigo, but apart from that, you probably would argue Borussia Dortmund have better UCL Fantasy options across the board, particularly in the defence and maybe in the midfield as well. But I'm now going to show you my transfer plans for matchday 13. Like I mentioned earlier, 4 of them are locked in, but the 5th one is definitely down to interpretation and it's not locked in by any stretch of the imagination. I'll most likely lock in all of my transfers during the deadline stream heading into the Champions League final. To be fair, I may have gotten that wrong. Only 3 of these transfers are pretty much locked in because it's between Courtois and Kobel for my goalkeeper transfer. I'm leaning towards Courtois, but I wouldn't say it's 100% set in stone. So that's something else to think about. Let me know your thoughts down in the comment section below. As always, Carvajal in the defense is quite simple. I think Schlotterbeck is better in isolation in terms of ball recoveries and delivering points when he does concede, but I think Madrid are more likely to keep a clean sheet, and I'm backing them to win this game, and that's why I might want to pile up on the defensive line, even though Borussia Dortmund have better UCL Fantasy options in the defensive line. Valverde coming in is quite simple as well. I know Jadon Sancho is the other midfielder who would really pique my interest, but Valverde is more locked in as a transfer, and I think he is also someone who can turn up in these big games and deliver a big moment. And a few years ago against Liverpool, he delivered the assist for Vinicius Jr. in the Champions League final. And Rodrigo up front is set in stone pretty much. I'm going to buy him no matter what. I know Fulkrug or an Adeyemi, perhaps a Haller, if he returns from injury, could be decent. But I think Rodrigo is levels above in UCL Fantasy. And it's also worth mentioning all the injury updates from Real Madrid and Borussia Dortmund. So with Los Merengues, Tchouaméni will miss the Champions League final, and that's confirmed by Ancelotti and Tchouaméni himself. He has a foot injury and he's doing everything he can to make it to the Euros, but there's no chance he will play. He won't be even on the bench against Borussia Dortmund. And David Alaba has the same ACL injury from several months ago, and he'll probably return in early August. As for Borussia Dortmund, they have Mori, Haller, Duranville, who could all be back in a couple of days due to several issues. So with Mori, a lack of fitness, Haller has an ankle injury, and Duranville has a muscle problem, and Ben Sebaini has an MCL injury, and he could be back in early June. But for the Champions League final, I'm not so sure. Maybe he makes the bench, but that isn't really locked in, and we don't know if that will be the case. But those are all the injury updates and everything you need to know ahead of the Champions League final. And as mentioned in the best wildcard and limitless team video and podcast, the captaincy is going to be difficult, but there are 3 players that stand out to me: Vinicius, Bellingham and Hummels. And Hummels is really for the ball recoveries. He has been amazing in this season's Champions League, but despite how well he's been performing, especially in the knockout stages, I'd still favour Real Madrid to win the game, and that's why even Rodrigo could actually usurp him in the rankings for the captaincy. I think Rodrigo could be a great shout, and also Brahim Diaz off the bench could be the difference maker. He might not start the game, but if it is 0-0 or it's level going into the last few minutes of the game, I think Brahim Diaz is the one player who can make that difference, score the winning goal off the bench for either side. And in terms of my 5th transfer, let me just quickly show you what I'm thinking about. So Marquinhos could make way, and I could go for another Real Madrid defender, or Schlotterbeck. I'm not so sure about that one. I think Schlotterbeck is better in isolation, but because I'm back in Real Madrid, I think Ferland Mendy is slightly more likely to be that second defender transfer. And if not, and I decide to make a midfield transfer instead, I could go for Jadon Sancho here. Although the likes of Brahim Diaz could be the one to go for. Toni Kroos is the other Madrid midfielder I would consider, but I think Sancho is more likely. So it's probably between Ferland Mendy, Schlotterbeck or Sancho as my 5th and final transfer. If you have a preference, I'd love to see what you think in the comments section and also in the live chat of the deadline stream on Saturday. Thank you very much for watching this video and listening to this podcast. If you enjoyed it or found it useful, then be sure to smash the like button and subscribe if you're new. Let's get this video to over 100 likes and let's keep on pushing towards 24,000 subscribers and beyond. Follow me on Twitter and Instagram, DylanRCM, and check all the other links in the description below for my Patreon, the Championships Discord server, UCL Fantasy League Draft Hound, as well as Spotify and all of that. I would massively appreciate as always. And for FPL, you can always check out the league code in those respective videos and live streams. And for Euro Fantasy during the summer, as mentioned at the beginning of this video and podcast, there is a link to join that. And if you go to any of my Euro Fantasy videos or live streams, you will see it in the description. There is an auto join link so you can become part of the FPL Dylan League. Take care, enjoy the football. I wish you all the best of luck for the Champions League final and good luck in the Euros as well. And I'll see you next time.